This piece is now repaired and cleaned up. New section in along there. So that's now fine. Now I need to move on to the next one. Flange that I need to repair. It's only a very small amount of damage, just on the end here. A bit of rust and a bit of thinning. I'll just need to chop off about that much and weld a new section in. This is the last flange repair. Start again. This is the last flange repair. Just a small section at the end here. That certainly won't take long. When that's done, then I'll be able to start assembling the bonnet. Alright, this one's now complete. This is the last one. Just the repair on the end. The weld is all cleaned up, everything's nice and straight. Drilled the new hole. And now it's to go with all the other completed flanges, ready to start assembling the bonnet. Now this has been an interesting exercise so far, just trying to get the worst louvers repaired. Now basically down this end they were pushed in quite a way. Now I've measured it to the extent that the lowest point was about just over 3 millimeters pushed in. So from a straight edge across the top, it dipped down 3 millimeters and around this area. Now what I've been able to do so far, and it is a two-person job, you need one person on either side. Luckily I've got a seat on this side and I've got a plank on my table, my bonnet table on the inside, so I can sit on the inside. Now with someone on the outside with a straight edge, and I've used steel at this stage, putting the steel along the flap behind the louver. So with someone holding that against the metal, and then me on the other side, finding the low spot, just using a straight edge on the inside, so you can rock it backwards and forwards, find the low spot, and then concentrating on the low spot and the areas either side of it, then using this hammer. And the reason I chose this hammer is it's got the flat on the back there, it's rounded, and in fact I've rounded myself so there's no sharp edges on it. And then putting that round edge, because it's just the right shape and design to fit it in behind the louver, and I can't show you, but actually it fits in basically in that position on the other side, with this against the low point. And then what I do, gently tap the end with a wooden mallet, my small mallet, just tap away and work the edge. Now doing that, I've brought it up just over 2 millimeters, so there's still about a millimeter dip in these these 4 louvers that I've been working on. Now rather than keep trying to tap that up, what I'm doing at this stage is working out exactly where the low points are. Now I've put black texture on there, or black marker, and I'll Now, using that, I can find out where the low points are. Low point here, low point there. Not too sure whether that's a low point or just the way I've sanded it. This one's just a small low point in here. Now, what I'm going to attempt to do, and do this very carefully, the louvers are fairly flexible. That's why it's easy to bend them. Now what I'm going to do is find something in the workshop here where I can grab the edge of that louver and lever it up. And I'm just going to say at the moment a pair of pliers, but I don't know whether I'll use a pair of pliers. But I need something with a wider jaw than a pair of pliers. Just slip it in there and try and lift that up, because there's not much of a depression, particularly on this one. This one's a bit more, maybe this one will take a bit more tapping on the other side, but I'm going to try and lift that and see if that will just get me that final millimetre. It's not so much a problem in the back of the louver, down near the flat there. There's no dent there, it's on the lip. So it's the lip I've got to get back up. It's the lip I've got to get straight. Anyway, I'll look in the workshop, see what I can find, and then concentrate on getting these remaining low areas up. But at this stage it's coming up quite well. Not concentrating on the back edges here. They're reasonably flat. Now, I'm not sure how they're meant to be. Obviously they're meant to be flat from there to there, but I've noticed there's a little bit of a rise when you come up from the flats to there, even on the straight ones. So it's as if when they've stamped this out, it's not actually a complete flat surface. It's not a flat surface from there to the flat of the bonnet there. It's just a little bit of a depression on all of them. So even on the ones that aren't deformed. And I suggest that that's probably the way it's been done when it's stamped. So it's not a case of me going through and straightening all of those, because they probably weren't straight in the first place when this has been created. But anyway, I'm concentrating on the louvers themselves. As I said, the damage is in the front edge of the louvers, where basically they just dip down. But at this stage they're coming up, and just a little bit more work on these, and I'll see if I can get them back to where they should be. Now I've worked out a way to lift the louvers up. I started by using a hammer from the other side to raise them where they were pushed right down. Got them from 3 to 4 millimetre depressions up to about 1.5 mil. That's as far as I could go with the hammer. So that's basically with a flat piece of steel on this side and tapping from the other side. Now I've managed to get the first 3 completely up. Just a couple of minor imperfections in the surface. I can probably work those with a hammer and dolly. But at this stage I've got it so the louver is actually straight, with a straight edge along this edge. So these 3 have been done. Now the way I've achieved that was, instead of tapping it, I levered these up. Now you can even get your fingers behind and pull these, and the metal actually flexes. problem with just pulling the top, pulling on the louver itself, is that the flat, which is attached to the louver, actually goes down. So basically the louver twists. Now, what I've done to stop the twist is to put a block of steel on the other side, basically this block. Instead of twisting, it actually lifts the louver. Now, it's not just an ordinary pair of pliers. These pliers are called grozing pliers. They're actually lead light pliers. I have done a bit of lead lighting in the past, and the advantage of these is that it's not two flat surfaces coming together and pinching the metal. The top part of the pliers is curved, and it just so happens that if you put the pliers with a flat under the louver, the curved section goes over the top of the louver. It doesn't touch the louver and sits in the crease between the flat and the raised section. When it's in that position, the flat part of the pliers is then able to pull up basically the edge of the louver. Now, in order to stop that just pulling up the width of the pliers, I put a piece of metal behind, depending on how much I'm trying to lift, and I've got different lengths. So if I come to this one, which I've been starting to work on, I've got to lift this section here. If I just put those pliers in like that and pull it, what will happen is it'll just pull the short section of the width of the pliers up. And I don't want to do that. So I put the plate behind and then work out where I want to position the pliers, which is basically in the middle of the low section, and then pull up. Now, while I'm pulling up, of course, I've also got a hand behind the louver with that flat piece of steel to stop it from twisting. Now, by using that method, I've been able to straighten these three louvers. As I say, minor imperfections which I can get out with a hammer and dolly, but they're straight along the edge. So they've come from being 2.5mm depressions to straight. This takes a lot of time, like everything else. I try not to pull the louver up too much at a time. I apply a bit of pressure, pull it up a piece at a time. Then I sand that off to make sure that I'm actually lifting it, and gradually I lift the whole area up. So this stage I've done 3. The ones that I've marked with the texter, they're the ones that are dipping down, and I'll gradually go along and complete those. But at this stage it's working. Just got to be careful that you don't get carried away and then try to pull it all up, pull all of the deflection up at the one time. If you're careful and gradually lift, it seems to be working without distorting the metal. The other thing I've done is that where I found that these areas on the flat were, well, actually they weren't, they were flat where the louvers cut, but they were dipping down. And I've gone along and flattened those to get them to the level of the panel. When I check the other side is basically straight metal from beyond the louver to down to here. So I've gone through with a block of steel and a hammer on the other side and gradually straightened those out. So they're all just out of shape, just in there, the whole lot of them. I thought it might have been the form, but seeing the other side is straight and doesn't have that deformity, I assume it was just when whatever's been put on there has been heavy and pushed the whole lot down and bent those areas just there. Anyway, I've straightened those before I worked on these, and it all seems to be working well. Now originally, of all of these louvers, 11 of them were pushed in. Now I've managed to get all of them back up to where they should be. Using the straight edge, I can check that. So the edges of all of these are perfectly straight. There's still a little bit of work to do on some of these ones. These are the ones I started using the hammer on the other side, and I've got a little bit of distortion in the rounded part of the louver, so I've got to work back on those and rectify that. The ones I just used, the grazing pliers, these pliers, I had no problem with that distortion. So obviously this is the way to go. Providing you use the metal plate on the other side to stop the whole louver from twisting when you're louvering it up, and also provided you don't get carried away and try and pull things too hard and run the risk of pulling it too high. I just took my time, applying a little bit of pressure each time, checking it, watching it gradually come up, and then lessening the amount of tension depending on how much more I had to raise it. So anyway, these are right. I'm quite pleased with that. We also went through and straightened the flat sections in here where they were dipping down. I did check the other side, and the other side was flat, so I've made this flat as well. So all in all, I'm actually quite surprised how little time it took once I put down the hammer and started just using the grazing pliers. They were actually quite quick in pulling them up. I was very, very surprised at that. I haven't addressed this raised section here yet. I'll wait until I've got the bonnet assembled and then look at what I need to do on that. What concerns me is that the temptation would be to make that just a flat section there, but I don't think that's the way to go, mainly because the bonnet itself curves on this section, so really this probably does need a slight curve in the panel. At the moment there's too much, I can see that. It's just for some reason sitting quite high. It does need to come down a fair bit, but I don't think that needs to be completely straight across the back there. I'll work on that once I've got the bonnet assembled. I'm now working on the right hand louvers. Same problem, they're dished in. Perhaps not as bad as the other side, although there are a couple that are the same. So I've got, I think it's 10 louvers to straighten out. I've just done this one. That one's come out quite well. and I'll just progress along. Hopefully I'll have the same success I had on the other side. Now I'm going to see if this video works, but I'm trying to show what I'm actually doing to get these louvers up. Now I've done all of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got those up, and the straight edge fits along the front of the louver there without a gap, so that's good. So just to show what I'm doing, I'm not actually using a hammer at this stage at all. Unlike when I started to do these, I was using a hammer to lift them up. I'm actually lifting them just using the grazing pliers. Now, I don't know whether this will show on the video, but I'll show you the steps I take. First of all, mark the general area with texture. Then I use a flat sanding pad and sand across the front of the vent. That then shows me the main low area, which according to the texture is between there and there. But when I put the straight edge on, and I put the straight edge on the front of that, the actual gap comes from there to there. Now it's only very minor on these areas, but there is a gap because I can see it with the light I've got there. So I put that along the edge. That then shows me the gap. Now then I look for the low point. Now the initial mark I made was the chalk mark there. Now that's just done by just using your eye. You could measure it, I suppose, to measure the amount of gap in there. The amount of gap on this particular louver is around at least probably 1.5 mil, and it's dipping down into there about 1.5 mil, but the gap goes from there to there. To lift that, what I do is, because of the area of the gap, basically from there to there, I use the longer piece of metal, just a bit of body metal, the longest one I use, and I put that under the low point. It's the low point that I'll be focusing on lifting with the grazing pliers. Now, as I've said, I don't just rely on the width of the grazing plier as the lifting point. I put a piece of steel behind the louver to do that. Got a magnet, and then reach behind, and I put my piece of metal behind the front of the louver. So what that now does is, when I put the pliers in, as I say, that the curved bit goes over the vent, because that's a rounded vent. The flat bit, which is, in this case it's about 10 mil wide, goes under the vent. Now, as I said before, if I just use the pliers, I'm lifting just the 10 mil area, the width of the pliers, but I've actually got a plate behind it, so I'm actually lifting from there to there, so quite a larger area. So what I then do, very carefully, put the pliers through. Try not to move that piece of metal, it's easy to move. I just got to make sure that the metal is flush with the edge of the louver itself. Then, where it gets a bit tricky, you could make this a bit easier with two people, but I've been doing it on my own. So I put a piece of metal plate behind the vents, and then put a bit of pressure on that, and then gradually lift the louver. Not putting a lot of pressure, but just to lift it a little bit. The aim is to gradually lift it, not try and achieve it all with one movement. Then it's a case of checking to see what differences have been made with that lift. So with the sanding block, still low between there and there, it hasn't even touched the texture, but it's starting to rub texture in as close as there. So what I then do, apart from blow the dust off, is to recheck. It's come up a little bit, maybe half a mil. Still got a mil to go at least. The low point is still in here. The area of the low is from there to there. So I've still got to lift all this area. Once again, I'll concentrate on the lowest point. Put the magnet on. Put my plate back in. Reach behind. Okay. Magnet needs to come up a bit more. The magnet only just holds that. I could put a stronger magnet on. The problem with a stronger magnet is when you go to put the grazing pliers in, they're attracted to the magnet and everything moves. So I try and get that in again. Okay. Position right. Gotta try and get that metal close to the edge. That's it. That behind with the plate. Now you could use two people, it would certainly be easier, but you can do it on your own. I'll check that. Now you can see a lot more has come down. The text is basically now starting there and finishing there. I'll just check the area that's got to be raised. Okay, that's come up quite a lot, but the low point still goes from here to here with the lowest point just a little bit higher to there. So I've still got a bit to raise. What I'll now do is I'll use instead of the longer one, well, I could probably still use the longer one. You've got to watch it as it gets a more compact area. I then reduce the length of the plate behind, and that can probably still use the longer plate. Okay, all that. Pull it up again a bit. Right, you can see it's come up, it's rubbed more of the texture off. Still the low point. Still going from about here to here. It's a gap. I'm looking at very small fractions of a millimetre. At the lowest point it may be about 1/4 of a millimetre, maybe a little bit more. So I'll go to the slightly shorter plate. Gently pull it up. I'm not pulling it up much. Right, just about removed the texture. Check the gap. And that is now straight. So that's the process. Depending on how deep they are, it can take a little bit longer than that. That was only about a 1.5 mil. I've had some of them a bit over 2 mil, probably 2.5 mil depression. But it's just a slow, methodical process. The idea is not to rush, just to gradually lift, let's say find the centre point, lift, and then just watch it gradually come up. And so you need to be careful that you don't pull it too hard. Now I have done that with a couple of these when I've got to within a fraction of a mil, and I've tried to pull a small area up. Now on some of those I've actually pulled it too high, so you put the straight edge on and you can actually rock the straight edge. You can't do that on that because that's flat. To get that down, it's just a case of using a slapper. Put the metal, in this case my metal plate behind, just so it gives some support for the vent, and then that way just gently tap them down, and I've been able to straighten them like that. So that was something to just to remember. If you do pull it and actually bow it up, you can very gently with a slapper tap it down, and once again it's the area of the slapper that helps. Even though the point you're trying to drop is there, it just makes it a lot easier to get the whole area in the correct shape at the end. So anyway, that's another one done. Tick that off, and I've got 2 more to go. The louvers on this side are now repaired. They've come up nicely. Very little work needed to finish them, but this stage I don't need to do that. What I'm going to do now is to look at starting to assemble the bonnet, but first off what I'll be looking at are the flanges. Bit hard to see this. Anyway, these flanges, there are parts of the flange that have been slightly bent, so I need to straighten that. I need to go along, make sure it's all properly cleaned up. That's almost done. So I'll do that on both sides, so I know that I'm working with a good flange to start the assembly process.